talk on the role of women in fostering interreligious harmony. To enlighten us with this topic, we have the resource person, Ms. Madhu Bhushan. Madhu Bhushan is an independent women's rights activist, searcher. She has put in a bracket researcher, perhaps she's the original searcher, and a very occasional filmmaker and writer. Associated for several decades with the Seeds Collective and Gamana Mahila Samuha, an autonomous feminist collective. Also associated with various networks and organizations working on human rights, including rights of sex workers, transgender communities, and Adivasis. She is also very much associated with the Ashirwad Center for Social Concern, with various issues we are working together. Ms. Madhu Bhushan, a warm welcome to you for this interreligious harmony group. Many people asked me whether there's a spelling mistake with the Gamana. Actually, there was a spelling mistake, but many people thought it was a Gramina Mahila Samuha. I believe you will clarify what is this Gamana Mahila Samuha for the sake of benefit of the audience. A warm welcome to you. You have perhaps 30 minutes for your presentation. After that, we will have a little interaction, sharing on the theme that is for the day. So warm welcome, and over to you. Kindly unmute and
yeah. Thank you, Father Gerald, and also the ones who sang the prayers to open the meeting. And thank you also, Father Gerald and Ashirwad Interreligious Harmony Movement, for inviting me to speak at this gathering, knowing fully well perhaps the risks involved in having somebody like me, as part of this discussion. Because, I agreed very spontaneously when Father Gerald asked me, for peace and harmony is something that, me and various, my colleagues, that's something that we've been striving for, and that's been the driving force in our life, both personally and politically. But when I read a few lines in the invite that was sent out, I began to wonder if I made a mistake by accepting, and whether Father Gerald made a mistake by inviting me. Let me read out the lines, where it says, "A woman of faith knows that success is found in trusting God to counsel and guide the best pathway for her life." Beautiful words, but I didn't know whether they really apply to me, because I am not sure if I am a woman of faith according to the strict definition of faith. And I don't know if I could have blind trust in some anonymous force like God to counsel and guide me through life, although sometimes I wish I did. But then I am a woman, and I do have faith, if not in God, at least in the notion of the divine or goodness that I deeply believe can be found in human beings. And I also have faith in the divine, which I think is present in the inexplicable patterns of life and nature, to which the human being is only incidental and only one minuscule part. And so, yes, I do, as an activist, as a women's rights activist of many decades, I do have some experiences and views on working with women from diverse faiths and on campaigns for peace and harmony. And from this experience, perhaps I could share with you some of these experiences for wider discussion and debate. And incidentally, Father Gerald, you asked me to explain what Gamana is. Gamana actually means attention. It means to pay attention, Gamanasi. And it also, in a way, comes from, the Buddhist philosophy of mindfulness. It comes from that. So in a way, it is, I guess, also some kind of faith in something that is larger than life. So here I am, despite all my misgivings, for I'm hopeful, given that your goal is interreligious harmony, you'll accept even a rather faithless feminist like me in your midst. For feminism, in some sense, for me, is my personal faith. So let me start with where I stand in relation to religion, especially the institutionalized kind. And I think, in the opening prayers, Sister did speak, about some of the problems, associated with religion, which I would share and perhaps speak a little about. Um, for before we get into the interreligious harmony and how women can play a role in it, we need to understand the role that religion has played in our lives and in our politics. Now, let me, maybe I should share a little about myself, because I'm born a Hindu, but I am not a practicing one. I suppose you could call me an agnostic, although I dislike, labels, most of which I find very constricting. And while growing up and even today, I've enjoyed all the fringe benefits of being part of a larger community without being a strict believer, of which I have been a part, shared festivals, good food, being entertained and educated by the collective treasure of shared oral histories and mythologies of different and diverse groups that are today being bunched under the larger umbrella of Hinduism, being inspired by the diverse philosophies, spiritual explorations, and debates that have enriched one's search for larger meaning. But over the last decades, especially since the 90s, I have become increasingly critical of this faith that I have been born into, not only because of internal issues like caste discriminations and notions of untouchability that one has always fought, as soon as one became an aware and a critical person, but also because of the increasing association of this religion with the notion of majoritarian nationalism that I believe will destroy not only the faith itself, but all that it has stood for, and also destroy the country as we know it. And it's a majoritarian nationalism or Hindutva, which today has become one of the central causes for the violence and disharmony that we see around us. However, this is this is where I come from. But this is part of a larger problem. And like I said, as being part of the women's movement, we have always had a very troubled relationship with all institutionalized religions, be it Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, or Buddhism. And why is that? Firstly, because religion, along with other institutions like the family, have been viewed as one of the primary sites of the reproduction of patriarchal values. In fact, it has been said that religion is the original rule book of patriarchy, the rule of the father, that prescribes the societal do's and don'ts in any community. And almost all religions, I think without exception, mainstream religions propagate the idea of male superiority. They paint women as physically, mentally, emotionally, and sexually, inferior to women. The latter get special rights and privileges on account of being naturally superior. For example, in Islam, the right to unilateral divorce is enjoyed only by men. In cases of rape, the eyewitness accounts of a man gets priority over that of a woman. And the logic behind denying women the same right is that the female nature is wanting in rationality and self-control. And so the tendency is to patronize and guide women, which is again common to all religions. And I think it's the acute misogyny that is present in every page of Manusmriti is very obvious. Women are projected in Manusmriti as not only dependent, but a major source of grief to the family if they're not controlled with proper stringency. And few ways of channelizing a woman's energy so that she's not inclined to engage in adultery, which is the greatest fear of the Hindu male, is to compel her to cook, clean, and look after household goods. And I think of recent times, the love jihad, the whole, the push towards love jihad is another way to not only criminalize the Muslim community, but also control the Hindu women in case they even think about marrying across religions. And of course, in Christianity too, you have, for example, in Genesis, where, God tells Eve that the husband will rule over you. And this is after Adam and Eve, and please correct me if I'm wrong, with all respect to all of you sitting here, that after Adam and Eve consumed the forbidden fruit, it was a folly for which Eve was categorically held responsible. And this was largely taken to mean that God trusted men with the task to ensure that women do not make such foolish mistakes again. And again, and God charged men with the duty to guide and protect their wives. So in almost all organized religions, restrictions exist over women's choices, over her body, sexuality, lifestyle, clothes, and just about everything. And incidentally, the supreme God in all major religions is always envisioned as male. Scriptures are mostly written and interpreted by men who tweak and translate them to suit their own convenience. Religious organizations are dominated by men, though it's commonly acknowledged that women tend to be more religiously and morally inclined and possess the qualities needed for discharge of duties that these organizations entail. So while the women's movement has been critical of institutionalized religion for institutionalizing patriarchy, the other critique has also been the link of institutionalized religion with the project of empire building, nation building, and nationalism. And this is down time and across geographies again. For the whole project of empire or nation building are patriarchal projects in themselves that legitimize notions of power that hegemonizes, homogenizes, and excludes. And I think we cannot escape the fact that expansionist colonization was largely tied up with the civilizing the natives drive of Western Christianity, and the Islamic jihads against Western imperialism nurtured in the Middle East, on the other hand, have led to extreme forms of fundamentalism with Islam. And as I said earlier, we are only too aware of how Hindutva today is assaulting and dismantling every secular and democratic institution in this country and targeting minorities, be they religious, cultural, or gender-based. And I will not go into the details of how all of this in turn has impacted on notions of women's rights and autonomy. So this primarily is the reason why the secular women's movement, as we called ourselves, was very about accepting religion as any kind of ally in bringing about a gender-just and gender-sensitive society, let alone that, that we can accept that it can be part of any movement for social justice, rights, peace, and harmony that have also been the priority. However, I think there has been a rethink, over the years, again, especially since the 90s, for if plurality and diversity is a core value and ethic within feminism, then we've also had to accept, feminism has also had to accept that for most women, it is not only gender, but their religion and faith, which is also a marker of their identity. And so religion is a problem where its structure and dominance have oppressed women, but it has also been a solution where its vision of liberation or equality has generated powerful movements for social change. So Islam's vision of human equality, or as Sister was speaking, the Hindu affirmation of women's power or Shakti, may be sources of strength even when most of the tradition compromises women's equality of power or power. And in the midst of predominantly patriarchal theology, I think women's theology of liberation in the Christian and Jewish traditions may have derived strength from the powerful image of the Exodus, liberation from bondage and setting forth towards freedom. So therefore, while, Orthodox religious practices may be relentlessly misogynistic, I think more in-depth and sensitive examination of these traditions can revitalize deeper, more ancient egalitarianism in most religions. And such understandings can help provide tools to subvert existing gender hegemonies within Orthodox religions. And unless we, as women and human rights activists and people of faith, find and build on these subversive traditions, just speaking of women's role in bringing about harmony will only legitimize the worst and not the best in our religions and faith, and it'll only end up reinforcing and legitimizing gender hierarchies and misogynies. Like the one, for example, that it is natural for men to make wars and conflicts, and it's women's business to clean up the mess and make peace. And I think that's invariably the position that women find themselves in. So, having given this critique, let me come now to how feminists or women would understand and practice harmony or peace. For I think we also need to understand and see that women define harmony or peace in very different ways from the mainstream discourse. And without trying to essentialize women's approach to peace and harmony, the fact is that everyday experiences of women impact on how they react to situations of violence and conflict. And trying to understand the different experiences of women in conflict and their responses to it helps break free from traditional and often limited approaches to conflict resolution that tend to be dominated by male perspectives. And one can understand that more holistic understandings of harmony that for women invariably start from within their own homes and everyday acts of making peace and building communities. And there is little doubt that for a culture of harmony and peace, that a culture of harmony and peace has to be grounded in processes and smaller acts of community building that are linked with social justice. And ways of achieving it have to go beyond the masculine constructs of policy and political strategies. And I think somebody like Ela Bhatt, who is a founder of Seva, and who in fact has worked a lot with, with women of faith also. She puts it, saying that peace is about the ordinariness of life, how we understand each other, how we share meals and share courtyards. And that is what women do. That very ordinariness and the kinds of livelihoods that so many women pursue are absolutely central for life. And this is what keeps communities together. So it is in this context, that I'd like to share some recent, experiences of harmony, some recent experiences, from initiatives that I had been part of, and some, experiences that one has picked up, has learned about along the way. Let me share some experiences first about, some recent times. I think all of us have been, familiar with the debates on citizenship, communal violence, etc. That this year really, that last year, last year and the beginning of this year, I think many of us have been part of these, campaigns, which were against not only the citizenship laws that was in fact targeting the minorities clearly and the Muslims, but also against the accompanying communal violence. And because I think we've seen how communal violence has really eroded the fabric of our society, and legitimized majoritarian, kind of rule in a sense. So as part of all these campaigns, I think we also, for example, many of us were were participants in Bilal Bagh. I think many of us, used to go there repeatedly, and we've heard about what has happened in Delhi and different places. I think this was, markedly different because this was an extended public campaign. And we were talking about citizenship. We were talking about women reclaiming citizenship because it was largely women-led. While it was, talking of citizenship, it was a women-led initiative. And so you could see that, the difference in the way the whole campaign was really, carried out, because it involved not just, political sloganeering. It really brought in the entire community. And how could protests like this really sustain? It is because entire communities were part of it. It was not just individual women and men who came. It was entire, communities that participated, families, children, old people. I think it was spread across. So it was not just a politically active people. It was everyday, ordinary people who were drawn into it. And that was seen in the hundreds and thousands of women who really sat, in the cold, come rain, come shine, come, everything. Women just sat for days on end, for weeks on end, for months on end, until, the lockdown happened. And I think the other important, aspect of this whole movement was the way, while there was, the kind of the larger macro political dimension of it, I think what also one saw was what Ela Bhatt was talking about, the ordinariness of life. There was the sharing of meals, there was a sharing of spaces, there was sharing of stories, children were, sitting around, they were drawing, they were painting. And it was this very ordinariness, that women are able to kind of draw from to sustain, their larger political battles, which I think is so very important. And in this connection, I also want to share that in Bangalore itself, we had ourselves done, many women's organizations had come together. And apart from being part of, Bilal Bagh, we had also started another process called Aman Chowk. Aman means, peace, it means harmony. And Chowk is a public space. And so we tried to create a public space also, in the city. And we gathered, there were diverse organizations and women of different faith who came together, whether it is, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Dalit, tribals, many women, came together. And we had a program, which focused on peace, and where we did not talk of peace only in a singular sense. We spoke of peace and harmony that starts from within the home and spreads into the community, and also speaks of a larger, politics. So for example, in the program itself, in Aman Chowk, we had simultaneous, we didn't have one speaker, we had many speakers and simultaneous conversations. And what were the issues? It was on domestic violence that women have been facing. It was on constitutional rights. It was on experiences of love. It was people sharing poetry. It was women sitting and doing actual work like quilting. So it was a multiplicity and diversity of people and of experiences. And it was and you had diversity of genders. You had men, women, trans people, gay, lesbian, queer. You had different classes of women. You had from women from the informal sector. You had garment workers, sex workers, domestic workers, tribals, and you had different ways of expression. So in a way, it was inherently. We tried, even in the process, so it was not just a program, even in the process, we tried to ensure that there was a diversity, and it is, after all, it is diversity that ensures democracy and harmony in very, unique ways. So this was one example. And how else, where, the other little example I'd like to share of where women try to find peace and harmony, even in the midst of conflict. The other experience I want to share is when we were part recently of a fact-finding, on the in the recent violence that was there in Bangalore, on the DJ Handi violence. We met different people who were impacted and were witnesses to the violence, and apart from different political parties, and we met political parties across the spectrum. We met, whether it was Congress or whether it was JDS or whether it was SDPI or BJP, we met all the political parties, and we met, Muslims, Hindus, Dalits, Christians, everyone who lives there. And we try to get a very local and community-based understanding of the violence from how they experienced it. And it was not surprising, but in a way it was also surprising how we got only, in a way it was like a very repetitive statement that we got from everybody we spoke to across the spectrum, whether it was religious or whether it was ideological or whether it was political. We only got one statement from everybody saying that how the local communities have been living together in peace and in harmony. And I don't think they were just lying or, giving us a line, so we could feel happy. I think you could see it. You could see it in their, in the ways that they have lived their lives. For example, even somebody like, Naveen, who was one of the accused in this case, who put out that social media post, that caused all the violence. His mother, told us how, and whose house was burnt. Their house was burnt, by the mobs, and of course it was a Muslim-led mob. But Naveen's mother had no rancor towards the youth who did the violence. In fact, she was blaming her son, saying that what he did was wrong. He had no business provoking the community with his posts and with his earlier posts. And she was very open and very natural and very spontaneous about the way she understood violence. She said what her son did was wrong. And in fact, she appreciated the fact that the mobs who came, they ensured that they remained safe. And she said some of the young men who came actually herded them to safety. And, of course, they burnt the house, but she really bore no rancor. It was very remarkable to see that. And it was also remarkable to see how women, made alliances in the midst of that conflict. We met, families, we met a Muslim family, Muslim women who had sheltered, some Christian women, when they came to, when the mobs came to burn a bar, and this was a Christian family that was living behind the bar. And the Muslim women came and said, you come and stay with us just in case, something happens to you. And when we asked, did you not feel scared? She said, how, this is our responsibility. Today she was in a problem. Tomorrow, if I'm in a problem, then she would definitely help me. So it is as simple and natural and spontaneous as that. And the another statement that I'll never forget is that how of course, all of them were conscious of the political agenda that really generated the violence. But there was this old woman who told us, that yes, the violence was it was wrong, but they said that our men, the men who went and got angry and set fire to the police station. She said our men fell into the trap with their impatience. She said they could have been a little more patient. Again, something so spontaneous and so natural, an everyday act of understanding how peace and harmony can be maintained. And it was the women who told us very categorically in the midst of this whole violence. I think it was such a holistic judgment that they gave us, saying that the Facebook post was wrong, the violence that the men did was wrong, and the reactions from the police were also wrong, because there was a lot of violence from the police that came onto the community. So they were able to see how peace has been violated at all levels, and they were able to see how responsible each one of them was to really maintain the harmony across the kind of divides that each one came from. So these are some instances, which really, in a way, are reaffirming in the midst of all the bleak darkness that really surrounds us. And other examples also. This was at the local level, but I think as the women's movement, I think we've also seen how women's organizations have tried to mobilize around this more holistic notion of harmony and peace that transcends the kind of divides. And how we've seen that women's skills and social positions have given them different perspectives on issues of peace and conflict. And across the globe, women have demonstrated their abilities to achieve common ground and work effectively to better their communities in instances where the men have failed. For example, I was reading about some stories from Liberia, and in Africa, the kind of civil, the kind of violence that is there. Of course, it has very complex roots, but it has reflected in a lot of civilian violence, one group against the other, warlords. So this was in Liberia when women came together and they tried to bridge ethnic and religious divides to really push their country towards peace. For example, there was a Liberian women's initiative that was started in 1994. And they started saying that we are tired of hiding in the bushes, eating grass and burying our dead, because violence was so everyday. And although, some of them were reluctant to join, this enterprise, but they overcame their fears. And one of the leaders, as she said, some of us weren't even sure we'd make it because the warlords fight us with their guns and we have nothing. And so I said, let us go in faith. So these were women of faith. And she said, let us go in faith. And the Liberian Women's Institute asked their members to pray for peace every night at 10 o'clock in their respective homes. And with their whole campaign for peace, they actually forced the warring factions to have peace talks that resulted in the Liberian Peace Accords in 2004. So what was a very local movement, kind of built up momentum and led towards peace, in the community. Another very interesting kind of incident, that came out of this whole movement for peace. There was another, organization there called the Liberian Women in Peace Building Network, called the WIPNET. They brought together the Muslim and Christian women using slogans like does the bullet know a Christian from a Muslim? I think that is something very familiar that we all, know. And this they did to emphasize the commonalities. And of course, there were some setbacks in their peace movement because a few in the community refused to pray with women who are not of the same religion, because this is something that one has to contend with. How do you, contend with even different ways to pray, different ways to faith? But, so they were refusing to pray with women of another faith, saying that that would dilute their faith. But finally, they did come together to advocate for peace. And again, this movement really pushed for peace talks. And this is a very interesting incident, and which I would like to share here, saying that when there were peace talks happening, with all these male warlords, where they're all sitting, and there was a building in which the peace talks were being held, and it was being monitored by some of the leaders of this the women's movement that had really pushed for these peace talks, and the talks broke down. And the warlords came out. They tried to kind of come out of the thing, saying that the peace talks have failed. And so what did the women do? They stood around the building and they held hands. And they said that we are not going to let you come out. And we're going to keep you inside that room without water and without food so that you will know what we feel. So they didn't allow, these so-called warlords to come out, and they pushed them back to really speak. And when the policemen, approached these leaders, and they said that, that they were all obstructing, justice, what did the women do? And what did one of the leaders do? She began to remove her hair clip, and she threatened to strip naked. Because in Liberia, like I think all of you know what happened in Manipur, with the women, the mothers there, who stripped naked because of the rapes that were happening to their daughters. In Liberia too, if an older woman willfully undresses in front of a man, the man's family will be cursed. So instead of arresting the women, the police backed away and called the police off. And then after this whole, push, this very moral and ethical push that the women did, the war peace talks were resumed, and finally, it did result finally in some kind of a peace accord that came there. So these are some instances to just share that how not only about women's role in bringing about peace and harmony, and interreligious and it could be across different divides of caste, class, religion, but for how women are able to are able to overcome these divides to speak about harmony. And why is it that in these instances they have been successful? It is because I think harmony. I think the notion of harmony is very inextricably tied with issues of justice, peace, democracy, and rights, both within the home and in the community and in the country and in the world. And I think it's this kind of interconnectedness, of harmony with these, issues that really makes, any kind of movement for peace and harmony far more effective and far more sustained. Maybe I'd just like to, end, because I'd like there to be, some kind of discussion, further. I just want to end with a few lines, and these lines are not by any big poet, but these are the lines that were written. I was talking to you about Aman Chowk, the kind of program that we had done in Bangalore at the height of the anti-citizenship, movement, and where we were really trying to speak about harmony and communal harmony and peace. And I told you that one of the programs, one of the events was really for women who gathered there to write poetry. So they wrote their poetry. So you had women from diverse faiths, and including, tribal women, including garment workers, including domestic workers. Everybody came together, and they not only wrote poetry, but they also did some art with the poetry. And so these were the lines that they all put together collectively. And I think in a way, this symbolizes what, harmony and peace really meant to the women who participated. It came from inside their hearts. So what was it? And they called it, because it was like a river of poetry that was flowing, that was how they had conceived of the event. So it was titled, "Come See the River." And these were the lines that the women all together, women and young men who were there, who collectively wrote these lines. And they said, this is how it went. It said, "Come see the river. A river is no mere river. It is a metaphor, like my country, that is all-inclusive. My river is my own, like that of my tears. A river is the sun's trail to his home, a smiling flower, a blossoming note. A river is like my mother's love that accepts everything. A flowing river is like running feet, and the sky that looks on, its eyes stretched far. A river is no mere river. It is a metaphor, like my country, that is all-inclusive. My river is my own, like that of my tears. A river is like my mother's love that accepts everything. A flowing river is like running feet, and the sky that looks on, its eyes stretched far." I think I'll end with this, and would look forward to some questions and discussions on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu, for this beautiful presentation that you have given us. You have started your presentation with how religion is very much closely linked with the patriarchy, and you have also given a fair critique of various religions, how they end up in perpetuating the whole understanding of patriarchy, or perhaps system of patriarchy. And for that matter, the women's movement have become very critical of institutionalized religion. And continuing with that, the whole concept of empire and nation building will definitely add to it. Having said that, you also mentioned there are both the sources or oppressive source where women can be put down, or also there is a source of liberation where women can raise their voice for a greater transformation in society. And giving the examples of Bilal Bagh as well as Aman Chowk, who were the lived experiences, how harmony was very much expressed and lived in with by women in these events that took place in our city in Bangalore. And especially also you mentioned the role of women's organization in fostering peace and harmony. And more importantly, you mentioned the harmony is essentially connected with the issue of justice. If there is no justice, that harmony does not make sense. It is not only adjusting ourselves artificially, but getting to the root issues and addressing them and perhaps expressing them is what is harmony. So thank you for all those insights and challenging the institutional religion as well, where it fails continually to promote the perhaps dignity of women for a certain extent, and perhaps a woman's voice in a cultural context. Now it is open for the audience to raise the question. You can ask the questions directly, or perhaps you can also type questions in chat box. There are a few questions that are already come. The first question is, what do you see as your role born into a Hindu family? Uh, that is the question. How? What made you perhaps to speak radically, much different from traditional Hindu family? That is the question.
I think it's because, like I said, I never really saw myself as a Hindu, because for me, being Hindu has been a very, it's just something that I was born into. It doesn't, for me, it never marked me, it never marked me. I was born into it, yes, but it never marked me because I was never a practicing Hindu. And I guess I have to be grateful to my family, that never pushed me into that. We were a fairly progressive and liberal family. My father was very progressive, although he did kind of turn towards Hindutva in his later years. But I think he did lay the foundation for a very broad, liberal notion of religion and the country and the secular, and so secularism was something that we took for granted, whether it was in our home and as we grew up. So it was, so I never changed, in that sense at all. I think what really shook me up was, one was aware, like I said, of our practices within, like caste and untouchability, that we were very critical of. But I think what really shook me up was in the 90s, with the whole demolition of the Babri Masjid. And then you could really see how, Hinduism was being changed into a political project, of Hindutva. And that was something that one could not stand. I mean, it affected me very, very deeply because it was also, like I said, finally, it was a start from within the home because one could see people, whom you loved and whom you respected, suddenly talking, and behaving differently and behaving in a very bigoted way, that it was intolerable. One couldn't deal with it. So I think the fight really, in that sense, that's what I say, I think for me, the fight has always been as much personal as it has been political. So so these kind of struggles have to start from within the home. So it was something that, one raised, from like, as like the fight with patriarchy, even that has to start. It's not something that you fight outside. It's a fight that starts from inside. And all movements of social justice, I think, have to start from within the home. Otherwise, it just becomes a nice political ideology. And you can say the right things and do the right things, but at home, you're something totally different. So I think in that sense, too, the whole, desire or the kind of fight for a more diverse and plural and secular ethos really began for me from within the home, from questioning what was happening inside my own home. So yes, I guess these were some of the beginnings.
Yeah. Thank you, Vakil sir, as a question. Yes, go ahead, Vakil.
Madam, actually, this is not a question. I want to take off my hat for you are a very frank, fearless speaker with a lot of gusto and passion. You had tremendous clarity of thought and you expressed yourself beautifully. You have a great command over the English language, for which I'm really thrilled to hear. You were full of verve, vitality, vigor, enthusiasm, and zeal. And all I can say, ma'am, is more power to you and your ilk. May God bless you in all your future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a lot to take in one go, but thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vakil, for that compliment. Very nice. The second question is, what should parents teach their children about religious practices that are patriarchal? How to balance religious with the social teachings? Now, you yourself are a parent. Now, what can you communicate in this context and to the younger generation in a special way?
Well, I think it's not so much about teaching, but about living an alternative, what you're critiquing. I think one has to live it. It's not just speaking about it, it's really trying to live it, which is what I have tried to do as a parent, try to live a kind of, to keep diversity and plurality open so that, you don't, like, for example, I myself am a vegetarian, okay, because I grew up a vegetarian. And much as I tried, I tried eating chicken, I tried eating fish, I just couldn't deal with it. I couldn't do it. So finally I said, okay, I'm not going to try. But we made sure that our daughter, grew up eating meat, from the time that she was a child. So she is a natural, I mean, she is and we said that it's up to her, So I think we have to inculcate these practices from when the children are young. So which is why I said, I'm deeply grateful to my parents for having, where we had a home which was open and which was very critical, and in fact, my father himself was very critical about, mainstream Hinduism and about the practices, about the religiosity, about rituals, about meaningless rituals. He was he was a rationalist. So one grew up in that atmosphere. So if you grow up like that, so that is the atmosphere that we have to create within the home. It has to be open, it has to be inclusive, it has to be accepting of diversities. It has to be very, recognizing and respecting diversity. And I think that is something that has to be lived within the home.
Yes, thank you. Another question is on secularism. There's a lot of understanding and also equally misunderstanding about secularism, and also in our IRHM WhatsApp group, there is some discussion that is going on. What understanding you can give in an Indian context what secularism is? It is highly politicized, but for our interreligious group, how do we understand the secularism?
Well, I think that I think all of you if you've been discussing the notion of secularism, you will know that in India, secularism means something very different. In the Western context, in the context of how the church, evolved and kind of, took over the functions of the state, it was a state. The church was a state. I think at some point of time, there was this move to really separate, religion from politics. So separate church from, political power. So that became the kind of divide. Whereas I think much later, decades later, in the context of India, knowing that I think in that sense, they were very far-sighted, I would say. There was a wisdom that was there that didn't see, secularism as an absence of religion. One can't do away with religion as much as one criticizes it. But I think we have to live with it, So what is the best way of living with it? And I think in that sense, what the Constitution did, the understanding of secularism, which is there in our Constitution, is that it is that of living with multiple faiths and living with multiple religions. It is not so much the separation, of religion from, from state, but really a state and a society that's comprised of diverse religions. And I think that is something that we have to, kind of engage with, whether we like it or not. I might be personally very, uncomfortable with many practices, but I must respect it. and I must engage with it. I must push myself, and I need to push others also, so be engaged. So I think for me, the notion of secularism is an argument. For me, secularism is a respectful argument between diverse faiths. I would say it is that. You need to have the freedom to criticize your own faith, and you need to have the openness to be, to have your faith also to be questioned, whatever the faith might be. Like I said, it could be my feminism, it could be my ideology, it could be my religion. So I think it has to be a comfortable argument between diverse faiths. For me, that is secularism in the Indian context.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, see, sociological understanding is inequality is the norm, equality is an exception. However, you fight, inequality stands. You can, at the most, some theories say, at the most you can reduce that gap, but the total concept of equality is a myth. It is not a possibility. Now, the whole aspect of the patriarchy is coming under from that religious, cultural context. All the religions are from a kind of cultural context. Now, what do we need to change? We need to change the culture, or we need to change the religion? It is, every religion is born in the context of a culture, whichever religion today is institutionalized. So, can we blame a religion now today, which is a product of a culture, perhaps culture which is institutionalized and imposed to a certain extent? Now, whenever we say the transformation, where is the transformation coming from? The religion, understanding of God, you blame God, or you blame your own culture or cultural makeup?
Well, that's a complicated, there's no easy answer to that, I guess, because I think culture and religion are very deeply intertwined. Culture and religion are very deeply intertwined. So it becomes difficult to separate one from the other. But I think, like, for example, if we look at the context of India, I do think that we had, in fact, before Hindutva, really crept into our lives, and has held center stage for the past so many decades, I would say. And I think plans to be around for quite some time. I think the culture, in a way, the culture of not only India, but the subcontinent, I think that it has been very plural. The culture has been that of plurality and diversity, in Asia, in South Asia, particularly. So whether you take, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, the culture has been one of diversity and plurality. So even if we had diverse religions, I think there was a notion of coexistence that was there. There was a notion of coexistence. I think it's when you have, where you have one religion that wants to dominate, that becomes the problem. So which is why I said, you had, what was the problem, with colonization? It was because Christianity, which came from the Western notions of Christianity, tried to kind of, take over the world. So here you have Hindutva, which is trying to take over India and the subcontinent. So, each one is striving for, kind of hegemony. It becomes when one religion tries to become hegemonic, or when a religion tries to homogenize its various diverse parts, like the way Hinduism is trying to do today. Because like today, for example, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's from an Adivasi community, and she was saying that, they are trying to push from within their communities. These are all the nomadic and the DNT tribes. They're trying to push for this thing to say that, we are Adivasi religion. Their religion is Adivasi. It is not Hinduism. Because Hinduism now is trying to, take over every, smaller kind of faith that existed that may not have, come under the rubric of, because Hinduism itself is I think, it's a recent construct, and I think it has been, kind of linked to the whole project of nationalism, as I said. So now that is what they're trying to do. So I think in that sense, what we need, culture is something, I think, which is like the soil, from which everything else comes. So in that sense, I feel that the cultural soil that we have, been part of is far more rich compared to the West, because I think the West, the soil has become absolutely homogenized, whereas here there is still a lot of diversity. And I think it is our responsibility to keep that diversity alive and not allow for either homogenization or hegemonization, either of the two. So I think in that sense, that is a kind of culture we need to preserve. And religions are only part of that. It's
Okay, thank you. So one more question. I think it's directly to you. The feminist groups are accused on not factoring caste into their work and also being more elite. It is morely the Western feminist movements are also being very much replicated in the Indian context. But the very fact of that caste and culture has not been addressed sufficiently by the feminist groups. What is your take on this?
Yes, I would say that is to some extent true, especially in the beginning stages of because the feminist movement has also been very plural. I can't say that I represent the women's movement. I don't. I would represent one maybe strain of the feminist movement or the women's movement in India. So I think when the women's movement, what we call the autonomous women's movement, first started off, it was addressing very everyday issues of violence. Violence against women was the overwhelming issue that we were addressing. But I think what has been the strength of the women's movement is that it has taken on different issues as and when we engaged with it. Like as I said, initially, we didn't factor in religion at all because we said we want to keep away from religion because religion has been so patriarchal. But then there was at some point of time we felt that no, because then that is falling into the trap of trying to of a kind of homogenizing ideal. So we need to factor in faith, multiple faiths of women, what they say, and then work with that. And I think caste too, in that sense, yes, initially the women's movement did not address it. But I think, the women's movement in that sense has had an impact on diverse movements. And I think something better is happening now, which is that, women from different castes, the Dalit movement, I think, has been enriched by, by the fact that they're very strong feminists, in the Dalit movement. And in that sense, they have enriched the feminist and the women's movement. So it's not that, the feminist movement has not been this one kind of a movement at all. It has grown and evolved over time. And I think it has also responded to a greater or lesser extent. And I think today you see a very vibrant Dalit feminism, which is really, in a way challenging the older feminist movement. I won't say the feminist movement today, because today there is no feminist movement that was there, 3 decades ago. Today, the kind of feminist movement we see is very, very different. Of course, the feminist movement was accused of being Western. When we first started off, it was, in fact, we were accused by the left of, trying to break the class unity. Why are we bringing issues of, of gender, of patriarchy? It's a working class, that has to be, it's a contradiction of class that is most important. And in fact, they even resisted the question of caste at that time. The left movement did resist the question of caste, saying that that is also going to break the notion of workers' unity. So these are the various ideological strains that have been there in different social movements. And I think the healthy thing is that we have challenged each other. These have been challenged. And I think different strains of feminisms and of, left and of, caste, these things have also come up. And I think that has made for a healthier, kind of social and political mobilization, I feel. Because the feminist movement can't take on everything. So I think in that sense, you have a very rich and vibrant, Dalit feminist movement today, which I think is very healthy,
Yeah, thank you. One more question. See, there is a lot of kind of disrespect to institutional religion, but at the same time, the need or search for a spirituality or the neo-spirituality is growing. There is something, an urge for a transcendental need to go beyond. Now, can we say that spirituality is the need of the hour and not the institutionalized religion? Or perhaps the institutionalized religions do not have the spirituality that people need today for social transformation? What do you say?
Yes, I suppose to some extent I would agree with it. Because I do, like I said, one needs to make a difference between institutionalized religion and spirituality. Spirituality is it's a core and very personalized, need for somebody to find transcendental kind of, meaning to their lives. But unfortunately, spirituality today, in this capitalist world, while institutionalized religion has its flaws, its deep, deep flaws, I think the new spiritualities, also are flawed in the sense that they have also become very market oriented. So they have become like commodities, and that can be sold. And then you have promoters of brands of different kinds of spiritualities, so that is also there. While I agree that one has to make a separation between spirituality and religion, we must see the pitfalls that are there, in this too. I mean, we know what we have been seeing in terms of, how spirituality is being packaged and sold, to unsuspecting souls. And this is a generation in a way which is a lost generation. So it has embraced secularism and rationality, but yet feels empty. Because capitalism kind of makes you, it gives you every material comfort, but somewhere there's, some inner need that it can't fulfill. So then you have to package and, give these people, some spirituality pills, which is unfortunate, So there are pitfalls in either case.
Yeah, thank you. There's one more question, very simple question, a straight question. Dear speaker, so what religion do you suggest to follow? That is the question.
I am not a doctor who prescribes anything like Dr. Sylvia. So I would say to each their own poison. So each one has to find, what kind of moves them. All I would say is I wouldn't promote any one kind of religion at all. I think each one has to find their own kind of faith. For me, more than religion, I would say faith. Faith is something that grounds you, that anchors you, that makes you see that you're part of a whole, that, you're not contained in yourself, you're not God, that you are part of a larger whole, and it makes you aware of your possibility. It also makes you aware of your limitations. And I think a faith that anchors you, it could be any faith. It could be, like I said, it could be faith in any religion. It could be faith in, in nature. It could be faith in some ideology. It is something that should ground you and make you aware and more critical. I think it's also, while it kind of, it gives you relief, personal relief. I think religion or faith should also make you a better, a compassionate, a more loving and caring human being. For me, that is the role of religion. It's not just to give you some kind of personal deliverance. I think religion should also give you a more critical and more compassionate, view of the world. I think that for me is the primary role of any faith. So I would say that each one has to find their own faith, which will enable them to become better human beings.
Yes, there is just one more clarification there. Has religion failed at its job in fostering spirituality in today's society?
Well, I suppose in a way institutionalized religion has, because I think they've been too caught up in, perpetuating institutions and powers and hierarchies and getting involved with other kind of political projects, and instead of, being trying to, like I said, foster a world that is more, inclusive and compassionate and caring. They've got too involved with the politics of life. Although I would not say, I think this is, I don't want to kind of make this, divide between politics and spirituality in that sense. Yes, the state needs to be secular, but I think people's lives, they have to find that thread that connects the spiritual with the political. There has to be that kind of a thread that connects. So in that sense, I think institutionalized religions have failed us, I would say. I would say they have failed us tremendously. And they have been a source of great violence and great strife. And one hopes that they recover their older roots. Religions recover their older roots, of where it was not so centralized, not so institutionalized, where it was really faith and spirituality that were its foundations.
Yes, religion also played the role of healing for a larger extent. So the question is being asked, what is the effect of religion and spirituality on mental health? That is the question. Whether, since religion is not playing that role, religion is playing more political role, is it a mental health issues are on increase? I don't know what is, that is the presumption of the question, but that is a question. What is the effect of religion and spirituality on mental health? Or in a positive sense, you can look up, what it can have a sound mental health where religion and spirituality plays a role.
Well, at this point of time, it's difficult to see, because when you see how crazy people are becoming over religion, how religion is driving, you to such madness. I mean, when you see in India what's happening, when it drives you to such madness, not only in India, I mean, look what's happening all over the world. When your faith pushes you into such violent modes of being, there is a kind of collective, mental health problem that is there, definitely. Because I mean, today people have become unrecognizable. People whom I have cared for, like I said, have become unrecognizable. So have they become evil, or have they become mentally unstable? What is the issue? What is happening? So I think somewhere religion has, like I said, you need to go back to a more personalized, dimension of religion, not a politicized, form. I think religion has to recover its personalized kind of dimension if it has to heal, and if it has to, strengthen the mental health of people. Because the more it becomes an external force, the more it becomes performative, and the more it becomes aggressive, and the more it becomes competitive. So I think, and today religions have become also part of this whole capitalist world order, unfortunately. So it's an unholy mix, between capitalism and between religiosity, that is also fostering this this mental health crisis. But yes, I do think that a quieter faith, a more personalized faith gives you, some kind of, as I said, we need anchor. Everybody needs an anchor. So I think it does give you an anchor and a self-confidence and a deeper sense of a generosity of being, if one can say that, So I think we need to go back to a more personalized faith to recover our mental health.
Yeah, thank you. One last comment. I am adopting humanity as my religion. Any comment on it? This is the...
Absolutely. I mean, at the core of everything is a common humanity, which I think we've lost. All religions, in a way, I think, are trying to foster a notion of humanity, and it is being done in a specific context, a specific cultural context. But one is talking about a larger humanity. And yes, I would say, finally, humanity has to underlie every religion. If at all religions survive, if they don't prescribe or subscribe to this universal humanity, they will somewhere collapse. And yes, I think it is a universal humanity that should underlie our faith, whatever it is.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Sylvia, your hand is up.
I just want to add one point. Thank you, Madhu. I think this was what was expected from you. I think you kind of talked about religion, but you talked about it in a larger political and social context. The point that I want to make is that in the current context, religion is not an individual thing. So it's not about one person seeking, some nirvana or some, larger purpose. I think it's also about coexisting, and it's also about being aware of what's happening to the person who's next to you, to people in your country, to other communities. And you cannot just become insular and say it's my personal faith and it's me and my God. I think it's also me and my neighbor and God. I think that's important for us, like no matter which religion, to be aware of what's happening to people around us.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you, which is why I said, if we talk of, harmony, or even faith for that matter, it cannot be separated from the fact that it is linked to issues of social justice. It is linked to issues of democracy. It is linked to issues of diversity. It's linked to issues of acceptance of diversity and of diverse people, and also being more empathetic, to different forms of, suffering, of injustice. So yes, all these things are, for me, religion is not about me and myself, but it's to equip me, to give me the strength, to deal with to understand the complexity, of life, and to intervene in it in the best way possible. That's why I said, no, it's to bring out the best within us, and the best is not saying that, I will care only about myself. The best is when you're able to see your place in the larger scheme of things, and you're able to intervene in ways that create a more healthy society, a more healthy, diverse, and just society. So for me, religion is definitely part of that. It cannot be just individual self-fulfillment. I don't see it. For me, that is not any kind of relevant religion. Then that's just your individual trip you're on.
One very last clarification is there. What do you mean by personalized religion? Is there anything like that of customized religion? Religion means you don't have a freedom. There is a set doctrine. Code, cult, and creed is part of a religion. Therefore, can you have a personalized religion? Is it possible at all? Or it is a desire which is not fulfilled? That is the last clarification.
See, that's why I said no, because I have never been somebody who is prescribed to any, set, kind of prescribed kind of, religion. I am not somebody. So I wouldn't know, it's my limitation. I wouldn't be able to put myself in the shoes of somebody who believes in, in a particular text or in, one particular God or even three particular gods. I just can't even identify with it. So I can only say that this is the way I feel, and I don't have a religion in that sense. My religion is my work and my belief and my, and in the ideals that one tries to, live for. For me, that is my religion. It is not some, theological practice. It is not some spiritual thing. It is not. It's all, and all of this is part of. So when I say personalized religion, I was only responding to, I think, a question that had come up earlier. It's not that I say that everyone has to have a personalized religion. I'm saying that each one of us has to draw our source has to draw it from different sources. But finally, what is it that we are trying to do? It's exactly as what Sylvia said. It's to find the linkages between us and between, our neighbors and our community and our country and the globe, to see the injustices which are there and to make us more caring, compassionate, and empathetic individuals. You can do it without religion. You can do it without religion. It's not that religion is a necessary prerequisite, but if you are a religious person, and prescribe to any kind of, religious practice, that is what your religious practice should teach you. Otherwise it's very difficult to accept a religious practice that does not, impart this to you. So to that extent, I'm saying that, not, you also have, it's also how you interpret your religion, right? You also have some autonomy. It's not that you just blindly accept everything that's given to you. You also have to critique. Just because, there is a book that says it, I'm democratic to the core. So I will question it, but I'll question it in a way that betters it. Maybe I can just end with us, maybe I can just give you a small example, because for me, my kind of ideal of a person of faith, was somebody which, I have also spoken about it in many places, was a woman called Dodiyadgama, who was an Iruliga tribal woman. Okay. And I was with her in the community and I saw her once praying. Okay. It was late in the night and she was praying to Yadgama, which is who is her goddess. And you should have seen the way she was praying. It was not folded hands and, bent head and all that. She was just standing there and she was literally cursing her goddess. She was cursing her goddess and saying, how can you be like this? How can you be so unjust? You can see how we are suffering. What the hell are you doing? So it was literally like a personal rant, and a curse. And for me, that was total, she had total faith in her goddess, which is why she could even fight with her goddess, to say that this is what I demand of you. So for me, that was a personalized faith. That was a very personal relationship that Dodiyadgama had with the notion of the divine. So you have to be able to argue, with that which is divine. For me, that is the core of a personalized faith. It has to be democratic. It has to give you that personal freedom and that autonomy. And it has to give you a sense of the larger kind of, context that you're living in. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, with this, I believe we wind up today's session. Thank you so much, Madhu, for coming, taking out your time. and sharing your lived experiences, how women have played a very proactive role in fostering interreligious harmony. More than that, how women have a greater role in nation building. Word may not be very appealing, nation building.
Yeah.
We have to use that word to counter many other false notions of nation building. I think women do have progressive and very constructive role to play. Perhaps the space is not given, the space have to be captured. It's unfortunate. I think that process will definitely go on. So I would like to thank you for enlightening all of us with your experience and patiently answering all the questions and queries. And I request you to be part of our group in the sense, I'm not asking you to join the religion, to enlighten our group with the very healthy debate how religion today needs to play a very proactive role in all the dimensions of our lives in society. So on behalf of IRHM group of Ashirwad, dear Madhu, thank you very much for enlightening us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a good discussion.
I also thank Father Joseph, Sister Gracelet, and Sinta for prayer in the beginning of this session, and also all the participants taking part in this, and also the participants who will be watching live in Facebook and other social media this talk. So once again, thank you one and all. Take care. Pandemic is still around. Let us take care of ourselves and take care of our neighbors as well. So thank you. God bless.